Okay, good morning, everyone. I think most of us have joined. My name is Catherine Gordon. I'm the sales manager for Silversoft, and I trust you are all starting to wind down for the end of the year festivities. I'm sure you're all looking forward to a well-deserved break. It seems that 2015 have had its interesting ups and downs. Just some housekeeping rules before we start. This session will be recorded. I know many of you have requested that you want the recording at the end, so I will send everyone a link and you will be able to view it and take your notes at your own leisure. Also, during the course of the webinar, you'll notice that you will all be on mute. So if you have any questions during the course of the presentation, please just provide them in the question tab, which is in the navigation bar to your right. And we will then answer those questions as it comes through, but we will also have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, which we can address all those questions. Now, due to the nature of the topic, which is skills and competencies, Nick will be presenting it in a slightly different fashion, where we're going to have it a little bit more interactive. So during the presentation, he will ask you to participate in various polls and discussion. So for the polls, please can you answer the questions? What will happen is you will have a screen with the question and multiple choice answers. If you can just select those answers, Nick will then be able to tally the feedback and give it immediately. And in terms of the discussion, can you please just provide your answers in the question bar provided? It will be quite nice for us to get feedback from the audience as we're going through, as Nick will be sharing us best practices in skills and competencies. But as you know, it's quite a grey area and there's no right and wrong answers when it comes to actually doing the skills and the competencies. Now, before I hand over to Nick, I'd just like to share a little bit of actually who we are and where we come from. So just from a corporate perspective, Silversoft is a Deltek Premier Partner. We distribute all their products in Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. We were formerly known as HRsmart. I think I see some of my old favorites on the webinar, so you would have known us as HRsmart. What Silversoft does is they manage the sales, implementation, and support of the entire Deltek product range. So we have expanded our knowledge. We are still very much entrenched in talent management. We also now do project-based solutions. We have people planning tools, social collaboration tools, and accounting tools. And as a company, we have more than 16,000 globally with over 2 million users. And right now, we pride ourselves in being able to offer leading enterprise technology solutions in South Africa. So now I know that Nick would like to go through quite a lot with us that this morning. And before I hand over, for those that don't know, Nick has been in the HR industry for many years, and he has a wealth of HR experience and knowledge when it comes to skills and competencies, both from an assessment framework and from a recruitment and performance perspective. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to him. There you go, Nick.
Right, thanks, Catherine. Trust that my headset's plugged in properly and everyone can hear me. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. I just want to point out and ask you to please remember throughout this presentation that we're talking in reference to talent management. And talent management, by way of a very brief definition, is all about the acquisition and retention of talented employees in your organization. And for me, essentially, talent management is really just about good people management. So Catherine warned that this would be an interactive session. So let's kick off with our first poll. Let's see how good you guys are technologically, and see if you can go and answer these questions for us. And we're doing this first poll for me to just to sort of gauge you as an audience and see how advanced or much of a beginner you are with regards to skills and competencies. So the question that we're asking in this poll is, have you implemented a skills and competency framework? And you could choose one of those answers that's most relevant to you. And I'm going to give you a minute or so just to see who's participating and what the results come out, and then we'll share that with you now. All right, so it looks like most of you have managed to vote. So interestingly, we've got 40% that answered no, they haven't. Well, that's probably quite a good thing then. Hopefully we'll be able to point you in the right direction today. 30% said yes as part of job postings, and 20% was yes as part of our performance management. And that makes a lot of sense to me. It sounds about right. Usually clients are using it for recruiting purposes so that they don't waste too much time up front and they know what they're looking for. And then also obviously performance management tends to come a little bit lagging behind, but we're finding more and more companies are starting to use it properly. And then 10% said yes, they have across all of our talent management. So maybe we can get some input from them and see how that went for them. All right, so now some more questions, if you don't mind, and let's sort of get this discussion going. And you can just type your answers on these questions into the questions log on the right-hand side on that control panel. You just click the plus sign on questions, and you should be able to type into the box, and those will come through to us. All right, so first question, what are some ways in which you are using skills and competencies in your organization? And keep the answers brief, just give us the areas that you're using them in. Second question, are there any areas where you don't use them that you might like to start using them in? And then last question, do your employees see value in how skills and competencies are used today? Okay, so there's some nice answers coming through there. All right, so let me just share some of these answers that you guys sent in. So for the first question, what are some of the ways in which you're using skills and competencies in your organization? People have said putting them on job postings. Someone said using them to drive interview questions. That's a good one. Scoring employees on competencies for their job, so performance management essentially. Using them to look at gap analysis, which is excellent. And then link to that, I suppose, to determine promotions, etc. And the second question, are there any areas where you don't use them, where you'd like to start? Someone's put in for merit-based salary increases, or is a touchy subject. Establishing baseline requirements to determine employee training needs, very good. Also linked to that gap analysis, and linking training to performance. So quite a nice common thread coming through in that one. And then the last question, do your employees see value in how skills and competencies are used today? Some do, but most don't make use of the profiles, was one response. They don't right now, from someone, and then quite a few no's and one or two yeses. All right, so I think let's just jump into some definitions, and we'll start with skills, because really in our experience, getting these defined in your organization is critical. People can spend days just arguing about the difference between a skill and a competency, and that's really not going to get us anywhere. So if I can just start off with a few definitions so we better understand the differences between skills and competencies. So one way of thinking about it is that a skill is an ability that has been acquired by training. You can offer training to employees to help them gain skills. Skills are usually acquired or learned, as opposed to abilities, which are often thought of as innate. And skills are also thought of as hard. Okay, hard skills, and that basically means that they're fairly specific and they're quite simple to define. Now, if we look at the definition of a competency, we talk about the collection of knowledge, skills, and attitudes required to perform a task, and usually describe that in terms of observable and measurable behaviors, which is quite important. In The Leadership Machine by Michael Lombardo and Robert Aischinger, they share that a competency is a measurable characteristic of a person that is related to success at work. So these characteristics include a number of skills and attributes, including things like behavioral skills, technical skills, attributes, for example, intelligence, and attitude, for example, optimism. Very importantly, in the context of talent strategy, these characteristics are observable and measurable. Key point. And then competencies are often thought of as soft skills. They're a bit more complex, and they require more words to define than a hard skill. All right, so within competencies, because it is a bit of a gray area sometimes, there's actually 3 different types, which are quite important. First type is core competencies. And by core competencies, we're talking about company values or core principles, which apply to the entire organization. So core organizational competency profiles reflect the set of critical competencies required throughout the firm to shape the organizational capabilities and culture that's required to achieve the strategic intent. Okay, and that was from Rule and Orr in a press article in 2010. A core competency can take various forms, including technical or subject matter know-how, a reliable process, and/or close relationship with customers and suppliers. It may also include product development or culture, such as employee dedication, best human resource management, good market coverage, etc. Core competencies reflect the collective learning of an organization, and a core competency is a specific factor that a business sees as central to the way the company or its employees work. So core competencies would be something that you would generally want to measure all employees on. All right, the second type of competency that we talk about is leadership competencies. And these are competencies used to identify and measure an individual's ability to lead or manage. These are characteristics and skills that we expect of leaders in an organization. By using a competency-based approach to leadership, organizations can not only manage their current employees in leadership roles, but better identify and develop their next generation of leaders. While some leadership competencies are essential to all firms, an organization should also define what leadership attributes are distinctive to the particular organization to create a competitive advantage. And that's going to differ in different markets and different industries. So again, hinting at making sure that you're drafting up ones that are relevant to your organization. And the last type of competency that we talk about are functional competencies. And these are job or functional competencies. They're behaviors that are required to perform certain jobs or functions within the organization. So unlike core competencies, which are done at the enterprise level, these competencies pertain to specific job function and can often be classified as skills. These are job-specific skills which can be very different from role to role. All right, so we're going to have another poll. For this discussion, we're going to present several different items here. I want you to please type into the question log whether each item is a skill or a competency. So if it's a competency, then also identify whether it's core, leadership, or functional. So for example, the first item on the list is communication. So you'd identify that as a competency, and then it could be either core or functional. All right, so you should have that poll up on your screen as a question. Then you can define whether that's a skill or a competency. All right, excellent. Almost 80% got that right. Okay, so the next question, is assertiveness a skill or is it a competency? All right, so that's pretty much everyone's completed that one. All right, so 30% of you said that that was a skill, 70% rated it as a competency. Again, I don't want to say that there's definite right and wrong answers. It depends on the organization, and I'm sure that you're all answering from that aspect, thinking about your own company. All right, touch typing. Do you think that would be a skill or a competency? All right, pretty much everyone's pegged that as a skill. And then last one, please have patience with us. So is patience a skill or a competency? Okay, so yeah, I think just over 80% said that that was a competency. So interesting results. All right, so let's take a look at these and split them into the blue and green. So all the green ones we would peg as competencies, and all the blue ones we'd peg as skills. Okay, and I think you can see if you look at the blue ones, Excel, cold calling, touch typing, word by word, we mean MS Word. Those are things you either can or can't do, and you can certainly learn them if you don't know how to do them. Whereas when we look at communication, leadership, patience, as I said, those are a little bit more tricky to define. It's not so simple. It's not so straightforward. There's a lot of elements that go into those, and that's generally why we would peg those ones as competencies. All right. So as I mentioned, there's no right or wrong answers, and it's all up to the culture of your organization and what you're trying to achieve that will define what is a skill and what is a competency. The important thing to remember is that you define that to your employees up front. That's the key aspect. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the importance of core competencies. From Bowen and Ostroff again, when different HR processes are designed and implemented using the same model, it creates a holistic, self-reinforcing system. For example, when organizations select, develop, reward, and promote employees on the same set of competencies, the consistency unambiguously communicates to employees the strategic importance of these competencies. This creates a strong organizational climate that contributes to the establishment of high-performance work systems. Bottom line is people need to know what is expected of them. It needs to be very clear. Now, if we look at skills and competencies and the difference that they would make in your market position, Burson and Associate also expand on this concept. They found that competency-based performance management varies widely by industry, market maturity, and phase of growth. They said growth-orientated organizations focused on strategic competencies to drive leadership behavior, while organizations in lower growth markets focused on general management behaviors. So that's quite interesting, but again, it depends what you're wanting to achieve as an organization. They also found that high-performance organizations value competencies that build organizational capabilities, while lower-performing organizations focus on competencies that build individual capabilities. Sometimes it's it's a measure of the level of maturity within an organization, of how long they've been utilizing these systems. You've got to start somewhere, and very often that's focusing on building the individual capabilities. But once that's been ironed out and is working for the organization, then they can start focusing on the leadership stuff. And that's when you start moving into really good territory. So you can see why choosing the right competency types is important for what you're wishing to achieve as an organization. All right, so we'll talk about some critical business drivers now. What drives the need for a company's skills and competency strategy? Why should you be doing this? One of the biggest drivers is the need for a common language and standardization in HR to indicate objectively a level of capability in candidates, employees, and successors. So identifying talent acquisition needs for future will help you know where the skills gaps are in the company. You can determine what skills you need to hire for, as well as what training offering should be offered. Identifying characteristics required for better quality of hire. Are there any skills and competencies consistently held among our top performers? That starts helping you define likelihood of top performers when you're hiring for them. Allowing managers to know what type of talent is available now. So having an inventory of the skills and competencies of the current workforce helps when searching for talent available at any point in time that meets your requirements. Consistent performance reviews for employees. Having a competency model in place helps to identify key competencies for the organization as a whole, as well as which skills and competencies an employee might need for the specific role they fill. Building succession strategies. We know this is top of mind in a lot of our client companies at the moment. So being able to build out succession plans and provide training for those on the plan so that they're ready and at the right level for the skills and competencies. That lets you start being a lot more strategic. And then lastly, creating a measurable baseline for compensation and promotion. Having consistent performance reviews based on competencies makes it easier to use a pay-for-performance strategy and to back up the decisions made in relation to pay. And it also starts engendering a culture of or a perception of fairness among your employees when that's consistently applied. So a focus on the right competencies for your particular organization will impact several areas of the business. Let me know if you think these are important. Employee engagement, profitability, resilience, business performance, and retention. You see how what we've discussed would impact each of those areas. So some of the benefits. Competency modeling helps HR functions leverage their strategic roles by vertically aligning different HR practices to organizational strategic objectives. Again, according to Brown and Ostroff, competency modeling facilitates the integration of talent management practices by horizontally aligning various HR practices. For example, when organizations select, develop, reward, and promote employees on the same set of competencies, the consistency unambiguously communicates to employees the strategic importance of these competencies. This creates a strong organizational climate that contributes to the establishment of high-performance work systems. Yes, I've put that in for a second time because I want you to remember it. That's vital. All right, let's get your fingers moving again and get going on another poll discussion. So what's been your greatest barrier when implementing current competency models? All right, very interesting. 73% of you have said time and resources. And 20% roughly said skill and knowledge. And only 9% said over engineering. That's a very interesting result. I must say that in general, we certainly find that it's over engineering that slows the process down. But generally that result would come from HR people. And assuming that we're not exclusively talking to HR people today, which is a good thing. All right, so I'm just going to chat a little bit about what we've discovered is the largest barrier, and that's over-engineering. And that actually does tie into your time and resources issue, because when you over-engineer it, that's what starts getting impacted. So we found that the largest barrier to success in using skills and competencies is over-engineering or trying to establish too many competencies to start with, which often results in never getting out of the planning phase. Some organizations over-plan. Issues can also occur when we begin at the individual job level rather than at the company level. So our major tip there is start with those company-wide competencies. I'm going to give you a top 10 list of advice now. All right, number 1, create core competencies linked to strategy and capabilities. Your competencies should be tied with where the company is headed and overall organizational goals. So don't farm this out to HR on their own. You need to have people that represent the business strategy sitting in those meetings and discussing these things. Second one is to create core competencies that resonate your culture and mission. Your competencies should make sense for the employees you have working for you. If you have a fun work environment, use competency names that bring the culture into your competency model. 3, use competencies to develop and align HR systems. Competencies can help you drive your HR systems and ensure that there is consistency across different processes. 4, use competencies as the common bond and language between HR areas. So make sure that you use the same competencies across all of HR, and by HR I mean people management. This can be very powerful, and we will go more into this in a few minutes. 5, start with 10 to 15 competencies. Don't have too many competencies when you begin, or you could run into the over-engineering barrier. 6, start at the top and work your way down. Start at what the company needs and then move down the chain to the functional competencies. 7, focus on competencies that differentiate. So having competencies that will help highlight differences between employees instead of competencies that would or should be the same across the board for all employees. 8, don't reinvent the wheel. Use your existing competency sources, look at what worked and keep that. There are many competency models already in place. So if you don't know where to start, take a look at one that's already out there. 9, include core leadership and functional competencies. While it's important to focus and start at the company level, it's also important to include the leadership and functional competencies so that you have a full model in place. And then lastly, communicate, communicate, communicate. Let your employees and managers know what these competencies mean to the company and why they are important. Don't hesitate to share that in order to meet expectations for a certain competency, what you expect to see in their day-to-day work, and get that rating on their performance review. But don't let it end just with performance. All right, so let's have a look and see why it's so important to get these right. So if we look at the common link, in the middle you've got skills and competencies, and on the outside are what I term all the areas or modules of talent management. They link through to recruiting, it links through to your performance. I think those two are quite easy to grasp. It obviously links through to learning, particularly in South Africa with the way that our whole national qualifications framework is set up, with skills and competencies and the whole structure around what each course, what you will get out of it. Succession planning, often clients are coming to us asking how do they do this, how do they identify the gaps, etc. And if you're not starting with the required competencies and then measuring the level of those, how do you possibly figure out what that gap is and what's required to get people into a position to succeed? Compensation, obviously it helps to link it to compensation. In this instance, we're not linking it to a module in our system. In South Africa, we don't use the Deltek compensation module. Obviously, our laws are very complex, and there seems to be a provider that's basically sewn up the market in South Africa. So when we talk about compensation, we're talking about linking pay with performance and increases, based on measurable competencies in your performance management ratings. And then lastly, career development. Again, for me, very obvious. If you don't have skills and competencies well defined, how on earth are you going to know how to develop people's careers? So we're going to break those down. We're going to look at each of these modules one by one. But first of all, we're just going to chat about the basis, the core of what you need. And really, that's all about building libraries and profiles. So with this link in mind, we can start to consider how exactly skills and competencies have a role in these specific areas of talent management, and how you might want to structure your software, your processes, and your ideas. As we go through the next several slides, think about your talent management solution and how you might be able to leverage skills and competencies within it. Building out libraries and job profiles is a starting point for ensuring that skills and competencies are used consistently across all the areas of talent management. All right, so starting with the skills library, it's important to determine which skills categories to build out and then to group skills into those categories. Similarly, a competency library should be established. This library should include all of the competency types discussed earlier: core, leadership, and functional. Along with the individual competencies, to get the most use of the competency model, include development plans, suggestions to help managers know how to coach their employees when developing those competencies. And include rating tips for each competency to aid managers and employees in understanding how the performance scale applies to each competency on their appraisal. Job profiles should take into account the skills and competencies, should take into account the skill and competency libraries by including not only the skills and competencies required to hold the job, but also those gained by being in the job. All right, so if we start breaking that down into each of the different components of talent management, we start with talent acquisition or recruiting. It's important to create a job profile with properly defined skills and competencies. This will help to provide data that helps define roles and focus your sourcing efforts. It will serve as a foundation for behavioral-based assessments and interviewing, and you can use these same competencies to gather quality of hire data. As part of applicant tracking, you should give applicants the ability to build out skill and competency profiles in their application. Recruiters can then use these profiles to search by specific skills and competencies to find the most qualified candidates. All right, if we move on to performance management, a main goal of performance management is to support business strategies. So you need to ensure that employees have agreed upon competencies, performance objectives, and standards and priorities. Once again, competency-based job descriptions set the framework for performance communications and measurement. Having competencies directly aligned to function creates a sense of believability in the appraisals, which is vital, and helps align individuals to goals. And that's either their goals or the organizational goals, but hopefully the two are aligned. For performance management, to make sure that you build out appraisal workflows and categories with competencies that are important to the company. So when we look at the component of career development, as part of career development, performing a gap analysis for both new hires and existing employees enables managers to identify gaps to fulfill present requirements in an employee's current role, as well as to identify gaps to fulfill career path roles that an employee is looking to move into. Establishing key roles is a crucial step in identifying gaps and developing individuals to take on key positions in the company. And in addition to these areas, as part of career development, managers need to be able to perform competency fit evaluations on their employees, and both competency fit and gap analysis should provide employees with the ability to build development plans around competencies that individuals need to improve on. And when we move on to succession planning, which is often closely linked to the career development, succession planning helps by ensuring critical positions in an organization have talent pipelines. This includes not only C-level positions, but also manager or leader roles and hard-to-fill jobs. Depending on your company, you could manage a few of these critical roles or get very granular with the establishment of succession plans. Skills and competencies should also play a role in how you identify successors. Having a profile for employees that highlights the skills and competencies they have helps provide the ability to search on required skills and competencies. Having a common language helps you identify what a top performer looks like. In combination with career development and development suggestions in the competency library, succession planning enables you to find and develop potential successors. And particularly with a system, you might well find that these potential successors are in areas or departments that you least expected. And lastly, on learning management, tying in associated gained skills and competencies for each course makes it possible to use gained skills or competencies to aid managers in suggestion development plan items to their employees. Additionally, this makes it possible for employees to perform a course search by skills and competencies to find training that they may want to put themselves on in terms of managing their own careers. So in conclusion, companies need to develop a competency strategy that is simple but reflects the company's culture, strategy, and industry. This will give recruiters and hiring managers the guidance to hire the right people. This defines who will be promoted and who will leave the company. It tells managers what's important. It tells employees what is valued. It contributes to equitable compensation and becomes the common language. And I'm sure you'll all agree that in a nutshell, that really is successful business management. So I hope that you found that beneficial, and thanks very much for attending. I'm just going to check with Catherine if there were any questions that were sent through during the presentation.
Definitely very insightful. I know many of the clients that I work with, when it comes to defining skills and competencies, they don't know where to start. So I think your presentation has definitely given us a good framework in which to work to. There are a few questions that have come through. I'm just watching the time. There's one, they all seem to be very similar. So Nick, maybe you can answer, but you mentioned that you can build, obviously we need to build libraries and profiles, and you mentioned that there were sources that we could use from. The question is, are there any generic libraries that we can start from? It seems to be a lot easier when you work with a job profile that already has certain skills and competencies, and then we can take that sort of framework, that profile, and apply it back to our industry. So the question is, are there any generic libraries that the guys can immediately go and Google now to actually see and then bring back?
Yes, there are, Kat. There's two that I'm quite familiar with. Within our own system, we use something called the ONET library, O-N-E-T, which you can go and Google. It is a US-based system, but we found that it's actually really good, very useful in linking competencies and skills, knowledge required, etc., etc. So you can go and their library is quite vast. Obviously, we tend to term jobs differently, or give the job title a little bit differently. So you'll have to play around a bit to see, to find one that fits. But there is a very, very vast amount of positions in different areas within that library. It's very comprehensive, and that's a really good starting point, I think, for you to work from. Within the formerly known as HRsmart system, one can actually access the library directly from the system to start building your competency and skill libraries within that system if you haven't already got it sorted out before you go with some software. And there's also a local one. It's not as comprehensive, and the list of competencies are not as good. But if you do want a local flavor, I cannot remember off the top of my head what it's called, but I have it saved as a favorite. So if you do want to know that, please reach out to us. Just bang us an email, and we'll happily provide that one to you.
Thanks, Nick. The only other questions that have come through, I think everyone is quite interested to actually have your slide presentation. So together with the recording, we will send the slides. So there obviously was very knowledge rich. So it would be nice, probably at the beginning of next year, to actually take the notes down. To everyone, thank you very much for supporting us. We will be starting our next webinar series February 2016, so watch out for that. We're going to have a whole list together for that. In the meantime, have an amazing Christmas, enjoy your holidays, and we look forward to engaging with you next year. Thank you, everyone.